Good morning. My political guest this morning, if any politician can be a guest, is Jean-Luc Pepin, a man who has been many things and done many things and doesn't like being out in the cold, I'm quite sure. Trade and Commerce, Energy, Mines and Resources, Anti-Inflation Board. That'll help you to hate him. And, of course, the Pepin-Roberts Task Force on Canadian Unity. Shortly with Jean-Luc Pepin. But first this morning, a little problem concerning, not actually concerning the boat people, but concerning Wardair, who with the other major airlines has got charter contracts to bring refugees from Kuala Lumpur to Canada as part of the boat people or refugee program. And first thing this morning, we're going to be talking not only to two officials of the Canadian Airline Flight Attendants Association, but to Tom Spalding, Executive Vice President of Wardair in Edmonton, after the break. The dispute you're going to hear about between CALFA, Airline Flight Attendants Association, and Wardair is, in fact, I believe, in front of an arbitration board at the moment. But it becomes a matter of particular interest on what you might call national policy of national airlines operating in federal contracts on the refugees. Here is Brian Coxford.
This is a story concerning a dispute between the people who run this airline and the flight attendants who fly for the Edmonton-based charter operation. The flight attendants are led by their union business agent, Cathy and the national president of the Canadian Airline Flight Attendants Association, Shirley. And the dispute, believe it or not, indirectly involves these people, the boat people of Thailand. Some of these destitute people will be coming to Canada as part of the federal government's commitment to find new homes for some 50,000 boat people. And to get them here, airlines like Wardair and Air Canada and CP Air have signed contracts through to 1981 to transport the boat people from Thailand to Canada. And according to the flight attendants, that's where the problems begin. They say Wardair wants to increase its profits, break its union contract and hire cheaper labor on the Thailand to Japan leg of the flight, and use their own crews only on the Japan to Vancouver flights.
They're going to hire male stewards from Thailand, and they're going to hire American flight attendants in order to do the work so they don't have to pay the wages.
They appear to be going to World Air, which is an airline that operates out of Oakland, California, and they apparently are also going to be using Thai nationals on board the aircraft. We have no knowledge of whether or not any of these people have ever been trained in safety emergency situations under the jurisdiction or auspices of the Canadian government. We have no way of knowing whether or not these people have even had any training whatsoever with regard to safety.
So I suppose they're just going to put absolutely the bare minimum number of flight attendants on these flights and just, throw them a bone and then say, be happy. That's it. There's no other reason. How else would they decrease their costs of the operation?
The Flight Attendants Association, which represents Wardair and 6 other Canadian carriers, including Air Canada and CP Air, insists Wardair is union busting. They point out that Wardair has the same contract with the federal government as the other 2 national carriers, but the airline wants to play by different rules.
Well, in this case, the company has taken the position that the contract doesn't apply when they are out of the territory of the United States.
And the union's position?
The union's position is that, of course, it does. We're certified under the Canada Labour Code as a sole bargaining agent for every flight attendant on board Wardair aircraft. So we are the sole bargaining agent, and all of the flight attendants on board have a contract which applies at all times.
And it applies for Air Canada and CP Air under the same charter agreement?
Of course. Air Canada and CP Air also have charter arrangements given to them by the federal government to bring in boat people from the Far East. And we have contracts with Air Canada and CP Air, and those contracts are in full force and full effect. And Wardair is absolutely no different from Air Canada and CP Air.
If Wardair doesn't, I think that the only thing we can do is file an unfair labor practice against them for trying to avoid our certification. I mean, they are union busting right now. I mean, Wardair, and I quote one of their officers as saying that they were going to teach this union a lesson, and that this union couldn't tell Max Ward how to run his operation.
Max Ward is very open that he doesn't believe in unions and doesn't want them around. In fact, in terms of our organization, we've been around for 17 years and we've only had 2 strikes. One strike was in order to get the Wardair flight attendants their first agreement.
Well, the Aeronautics Act and regulations contain 1 flight attendant for every 40 passengers. But during our arbitration concerning this whole question, Wardair argued that the Aeronautics Act doesn't even apply once you get beyond the continental United States. So they may not even feel bound by that regulation.
Aren't these aeronautics regulations international?
They certainly are. They have extraterritorial effect. There's no question about it.
Kelpa says the same rules Wardair is trying to impose on the flight attendants doesn't apply to the pilots of the 747 and DC-10 boat people charters.
The pilots in Wardair are being brought home every 2 weeks, but they refuse to do that for the flight attendants. They are also applying the pilots' collective agreement in full force to the Japanese charters, the Japanese portion of the charters, and there's no complaints there. But they can't do it for the flight attendants.
You're saying what's fair for one is fair for all.
I would say so.
According to the union, Wardair has already laid off 20 flight attendants to make room for the non-union labor on those boat people charters. But in a conflicting move last weekend, the company took out ads in some newspapers, seeking to hire several new flight attendants for its expanding operations.
On the telephone in Edmonton, oh, just a minute till I put down my phone, silly of me. On the telephone in Edmonton, I've got Tom Spalding, Executive Vice President of Wardair. Did you hear the complaints of the CALFA officials, Mr. Spalding?
I heard them, although some of the words I didn't quite get, but I think I got the gist of the argument.
What do you say to their particular allegation? 1, that you're union busting, 2, that you're looking after the pilots fully on their contract, 3, that Air Canada and CP Air are honoring the contract in full, but the Wardair isn't.
Well, okay. Taking them in their order. First, I regard an allegation of union busting, which is quite an emotional theme, and intended to excite people and get them upset, absolutely groundless. Our labor relations with all unions that we have are good, and always have been good, from the time we first began to get contracts. And so I think that that's just a silly accusation. It isn't based on fact or at all. Secondly, as I understand it, they're saying that that in connection with the contract, as I heard the conversation, they're arguing about a very, very legal issue, and I have to take a great deal of argument on that point before anyone would ever convince me that language in a contract doesn't mean what it says, because the language in our contract is very, very clear. It says that the collective agreement does not apply to flight attendants in training or to flight attendants who are normally assigned on flights or flight segments which operate wholly outside of Canada.
In other words, what you're saying is that their complaint that you are planning to hire other nationals for the link from Thailand to Japan, you're saying that this is fully and legally covered in the contract and that they have no right to complain about it whatsoever.
That's our position, but I'd like to add one other thing, that despite the legal position, we've been flying with Wardair flight attendants since September of 1979 on the refugee flight program.
Mm-hmm.
We thought we had an arrangement that was acceptable by going to individual members of the Flight Attendants Association and saying that if you bid this job because of your seniority, are you willing to accept the following terms and conditions? We thought we had an agreement, but we were told we didn't have an agreement, and a grievance was filed. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is the fact that we have been trying to get Wardair flight attendants on these segments that operate between Japan and Singapore and Kuala Lumpur and Hong Kong.
Right.
But the union simply says, no, unless you want to bring them under the collective agreement, then you can't do it. Unfortunately, we have quite a few flight attendants who want to do it. It's our desire to have Wardair flight attendants on board. But we have a contract with the government which has flight dates, and we must perform that contract. The government doesn't accept any excuses for our non-performance under a contract. They say, here are the dates, you fly them. So at this impasse, well, we were still trying to get the union last week to agree, look, adopt our position, let's enter into agreements with Wardair flight attendants who want to go, and we obviously would like to see them on board. But the answer is no. We'll give you a big, long proposal to bring these people in under the collective agreement. Now let's talk about our pilots for a moment.
Leave your pilots there for a moment. As I understand your situation, you say to me, Mr. Spalding, that where you have charters that do not begin or end in Canada,
Right.
that are outside of Canada, you are free to hire whomsoever you wish, on what conditions you wish, as flight attendants.
That's right. And
That's your position. Well, can't you see, or can I not believe that if I were a CALFA union official, I would say, name of goodness, they're flying the same planes in the same time. Why not give them the same agreement as they get if they're landing in Canada?
Well, because their agreement has restrictive work rules, it has bonus payments for sitting on the ground. You have to understand that these flights involve 26 hours of duty flying a month.
Uh-huh.
These people may be over there for about a month, and they fly 26 hours of duty flying, 46 hours of deadhead or positioning flying without passengers on board, and then they're on the ground 3 and 4 days after one flight a week.
So you say it's a kind of special vacation for them?
Well, I'm not claiming it's a vacation. All I'm claiming is that for that, if we're willing to pay a girl, say a girl makes an average flight rate of $20 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Under that scheme, under the scheme that we offered them, they'd make about $1,500 a month. They'd make $972, tax-free, per diem allowance. They get a single hotel room for each of them over in Japan, and they work 2 days out of every week at the very most. Now, we're saying that that involves, since our contract allows us to fly anyone we like, we're saying, okay, now let's enter into an arrangement where we can use Wardair flight attendants.
They have not agreed to such a thing.
They have not agreed to it.
Now you therefore will hire, or perhaps are hiring, U.S. nationals or Thai nationals. Is that correct?
There are no U.S. nationals involved. We'll
Just
hire former Air Siam flight attendants.
And will you pay them the rates that you offered the Wardair girls, or will you be able to save money on that operation?
No, what you do is these people are not an unusual. Throughout the world, you have what you call service organizations who have pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, and so forth. You enter into a contract for services with a group. And it's just like going to another agency to have your work done.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to come back to the pilots, because they talk about our rotating the pilots every 2 weeks, which we weren't willing to do with them.
Right.
Our pilots are on a straight salary at Wardair. It is one of the most unusual labor contracts in North America. And we have a happy group of pilots who work straight salary. They don't have all sorts of restrictive work rules or anything else. They fly to MOT standards. And that means that they might fly 20 hours in 1 month, they might fly 75 hours in another month, but their salary is the same. It is a most unusual contract, and to compare what we do with the pilots, because they are totally flexible, with some inflexible work rules is just a bunch of nonsense.
Okay, couple of things you might want to cover. Messrs. Poole and Bruce made the insinuation that you might be dropping your safety standards and that you had laid off 20 stewardesses. What about that?
Okay, let me go first to safety standards. These service organizations that have people available in a pool to do this or that or something else. 1, they must be qualified on the airplane. 2, before any of those people get on board a Wardair airplane, they have to pass the Canadian level inspection for safety. 3, Air Siam flew 747s, which is the airplane we're using on the refugee program, so that I see no problem of safety, and I see a better problem, actually, of communication with the refugees, because these people speak in many of the ethnic dialects of the people on board.
How about the girls laid off, if any?
Well, now, let's get to the girls that were laid off, and we sent layoff notices to 21 girls. We were holding those girls and because they're flight attendants, in reserve, hoping to resolve this boat people refugee flight dispute with CALFA. It became clear to us that we were going to have no arrangement such as the ones that we had entered into in September. Then the most junior flight attendants in the seniority roster across the country that we were holding in reserve, hoping to be able to settle this matter, then they were surplus to the system. Now they mentioned the fact that in the meantime we're out hiring. And again, we hire once a year. And the fact that we have ads in the newspapers and all of the rest of that, those people won't even be on board until sometime in July or August, perhaps June with a little bit of luck.
Okay, 2 basic points and I'm finished with you, sir. 1, you say that there is a pool of Wardair stewardesses who are perfectly willing to sign the special agreement and be based to run from Thailand to Japan.
So we are informed.
Secondly, how about Air Canada and CPA? Are they doing the same inter-country trip?
Well,
and are they
under
paying
the CP situation, they fly into the Far East, so they can slip crews. This is, you see, this is a flight pattern that we don't ordinarily have.
In other words, they can fulfill the normal stewardess CALFA contract because they can slip crews on the normal runs.
That's right. Secondly, Air Canada, as I understand it, has waived what is called the 1 in 4 rule, where for every 4 hours on the ground, you have to give an hour's flight pay. And I understand Air Canada has waived that in connection with its refugee charter program. That is, CALFA and Air Canada have agreed to waive the 1 in 4 rule, because if you applied the 1 in 4 rule to our program, it would cost about $3,000 a month pay to a flight attendant for time on the ground.
Mr. Spalding, when are you going to settle it?
Well, I don't know when we're going to settle it. I'd sure like to settle it, but I can't give up our position on a contract that was negotiated in good faith, where the union every year has brought up this matter and said our jurisdiction extends all the way across the world, and it simply does not.
My thanks to Tom Spalding, Executive Vice President of Wardair in, I wish your headquarters were in Vancouver and not in Edmonton. We'd feel closer to you and more intimate with you.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Spalding.
Thank you for talking to me.
Next, Jean-Luc Pepin, Liberal candidate, I do believe, after the break. That was good. Glad we got that out of the way. Done. Finished. Complete. Both sides.
Problem is solved now.
I hate to do one side of a tiddly little thing like that. Last time.
She's not running.
Just refreshing some basic background with Jean-Luc Pepin, Energy Minister at one time, Industry, Trade and Commerce, Anti-Inflation Board, Pepin-Roberts Task Force. And you had the goal to beat Madam Piggott,
Yes.
the lady in charge of the Conservative patronage.
Yes.
In the last election.
She was not at that time. She was a member of Parliament. She had been elected in 1976 in a complementary election.
That's right.
Following the...
She's in charge of the Conservative. Who was in charge of your patronage when you were the government? I just forget the name offhand.
Everybody.
You all got into the pork barrel from time to time. Is that correct?
That's it.
Quite serious.
You satisfied?
I'm satisfied.
Good.
Quite seriously.
I'm here to please you.
That'll be the day. Quite seriously, there are 3 men, maybe 4, who hold in their hands and their minds the possible understanding of the unity of this country, as far as we West Coasters are concerned. There's Levesque.
Yes.
There's Trudeau, if he's really back with us, and we're not sure that he is, are we?
I would think he is. I would think that one of the reasons why he is the one you're going to mention in a moment.
Yeah.
Because I see you coming.
And then there's Claude Ryan.
Yes.
And there's Jean-Luc Pepin.
Oh, that's nice.
Now, is it not a fact, Mr. Jean-Luc Pepin, that Your Pepin-Roberts Task Force Report is not dissimilar in many ways to Claude Ryan's plan for a new base for unity of this country in an amended constitution.
In a short way, the structure is the same. All the essential elements, even the balancing, and the key role of what we call the Council of the Federation, the substitute for the present Senate, is exactly the same. So the spirit is the same. The general approach to the solution of problems is the same.
With one difference, that Claude Ryan would go further in a question of taking the powers away from the central government and making the 10 provinces more like Balkan states.
No, I wouldn't say that at all. By the way, we were not very explicit on the subject. We tried to indicate how it could be done. For example, that it was very difficult to divide the jurisdiction of the provinces and the jurisdiction of the central government in a number of areas. And consequently, we should have the system of concurrent jurisdiction with paramountcies to that or that order of government. The approach is the same, but we didn't go as far as he did.
As Ryan did.
As Ryan did, in terms of being specific as to what should be done, for example, with unemployment insurance or with ground transportation, for example. We didn't go as far as that.
Does Ryan's plan not say...
If I may do, Jack, the other basic difference is on language at the provincial level. You might recall that we took what we thought was a prudential approach to this thing by leaving the onus of giving rights to the citizens in terms of French and English services, school, and so on. We left that to the provinces almost entirely. We said at the end, though, if consensus should be developed, then they might be enshrined in the Constitution. Ryan, quite along with Mr. Trudeau, goes for enshrinement first, at the beginning.
In other words, enshrinement of the right of each of the official language for citizens of that background in the federal constitution to cover the provinces.
Yeah, but that would, of course, be very general. This is why we didn't go for it. Because the only thing you could say in the Constitution would be that every child is entitled to education in his own language, or maternal language, or whatever you want to say, in as much as numbers permit. Now, if you are the Minister of Education in BC or in Alberta or whatnot, you can make number permit or not permit, depending on what you want to accomplish. I don't have to explain to you how it's done. If you want to say 10% of the population is of the other language, you extend the district in which they are counted. If you want really kids to get the education in English in Quebec or in French here, you will, for example, bus them. You will give them pension in town if you want to accommodate them. So that's why we didn't go for it, but Ryan does. And maybe he has better judgment than we have.
Maybe he is right.
Maybe he's right.
Because
maybe English-speaking Canada is ready to go for that.
Because we had the Supreme Court of Canada decision on Levesque's Bill 101, wasn't it?
Yes.
In which he was really slapped down quite strongly in his efforts to remove English from the courts and the legislature.
That's it. And then you had the decision of the Supreme Court on the Manitoba Act, Section 23 of the Manitoba Act. Similarly, the Supreme Court saying you go back to having that kind of bilingualism in parliamentary institutions.
We all know, unfortunately, that we all know, perhaps not unfortunately, that one of the reasons that Trudeau was disenchanted to the voter was because he never did, nor did your government, ever properly explain what you were trying to do in the Official Languages Act, nor did you administer it competently. Guilty?
Part guilty, as usual.
Guilty.
Truth is not always black and white.
Next question.
Very seldom black and white. You see why I want to talk about this question with you, because I think that my party, if you want me to be political a bit,
of course.
My party, Mr. Trudeau in particular, but the party as a whole, has made a very substantial contribution for the last decade to the solution of these problems. It seems to me that in comparison to the other parties, we really stand out as the guys who have really worked at this question, and I think progress. And I'm going to talk on the subject at noon.
Where?
Here at the Canadian Club. And my theme is exactly that, and that should be addressed to the Canadian Club, is that we are now nearing finality in these matters, and the Ryan report is possibly the basis on which finality, political finality, will be achieved.
He is a tough guy.
Very, very tough.
He is
And
almost Jesuitical in his drive, is he not?
Yes, he has done in Quebec in 2 years really what you, I, and others would not have even hoped for.
In 20 years.
In 2 years. In
Mind
terms of, oh, I'm sorry.
But mind you, he was lucky because he had the chain-smoking Levesque who pushed things too hard and too fast in some ways, it would seem.
No, I think basically he became attractive to the population in terms of the sincerity and in terms also of the frankness with which you talk about these questions. You see, the basic point of the so-called Ryan report, that is the report of the Parti libéral du Québec, is that it dares to be Canadian. It says so. It dares to be a very federalist document. And I, for one, have always hoped that somebody in Quebec one day will stop being wishy-washy about that and state emphatically that they were federalists and that they were Canadians.
Let me say two things. One, now that we, the nation, has Ryan, it's quite obvious we don't need Trudeau. He's not needed for that. Ryan will look after that problem. Well, Trudeau is no longer needed.
There's no doubt about that the center of gravity has changed. Why? Because the referendum legislation in Quebec commands it to be under a single head. So legally, there's no possibility for anybody else to lead the Federalist troops in Quebec during the referendum than Claude Ryan. But then after that, you'll have to devise the compromises that are needed. I don't know if you saw, the Globe and Mail had an article on the similarities between Trudeau and Ryan. And it surprises a number of people, but it's true.
And the second point is that when Prime Minister Clark is around, or here, or elsewhere, the painful subject of Quebec is not mentioned, and it becomes rather like taking off a tight shoe.
Well, that's really my argument at noon on a partisan basis is going to be exactly that. When he came to power in June last, in order to establish a clear difference between himself and, quote, the former prime minister, end of quote, he took a different approach, saying that the whole thing was essentially style, non-confrontation, and action on a number of specific matters. Okay, and he wanted to distinguish himself in terms of approach from the previous holder of the Supreme job. And he did. Well, that was a mistake. That was a mistake.
Tell me about that mistake, if you may, Jean-Luc Pepin, after the break. Jean-Luc Pepin was telling us that Clark made a mistake by taking his kind of low-key approach to the Quebec problem, saying it's a question of style, and we'll do, if we have to, this, this, and this, and it'll all come out in the wash. Yeah. It seems rather reasonable and
yes, and I don't want to say that it is systematically wrong, but the trouble with it is that reforming a constitution, rebalancing a constitution, is a rather complex exercise where each of the parts are interrelated. For example, if I have good representativity in the central institution in Ottawa, I can afford less decentralization because my representative in Ottawa will speak for me as a region or as a province. Okay, so there is a balancing act. There's an interrelationship between that. Joe did not understand that, so he went out for pointed action, ad hoc action, on a number of cases without situating them in the larger framework. And more importantly, he didn't push the effort at coordinating the larger framework which was started by Trudeau. See, he wanted to oppose his style with the predecessors. And I'm not saying that, he said it himself, Joe said it himself, Joe Clark, the Right Honorable Joe Clark said it himself. Because he created, as you know, a few weeks ago, January, the Tremblay Task Force. You've heard about that?
No.
No, that's the new stuff. It's mostly for consumption in Quebec. In the Tremblay group, Senator Tremblay, he says, well, now let's resume that effort. Let's go now towards the wider base. But, you know, he's coming late. We've lost 7 months. We've lost 9 months of it. And he is telling us that this effort will lead to a green paper which will be studied by the party, studied by Parliament. No sense of timing, no sense of urgency. And this is rather serious.
Just the thought of another report is enough to give me as many grey hairs as you have.
Yeah. You noticed, huh?
Yes, I noticed that very much indeed. But, you know, at the same time, I don't know what your House of Confederation is similar to a proposition put up by, of all people, that great intellectual Bill Bennett in Victoria.
Yeah. You see, that's how really the evolutionary process has taken place. As you know, this is a German idea, you were aware. This is the Bundesrat in Germany.
Yes.
But in the last 4 or 5 years, a great number of people and institutions in Canada have come out in favor of it. Well, first of all, Mr. Bennett has come out in favor of it.
You must have all give me a 10-second explanation of a House of Federation of Confederation.
The idea is that the federal provincial conferences, the system we have is confrontational, not always productive, gives the impression that the country is about to break down and so on and so forth. Instead of that, you institutionalize these. You institutionalize the consensus, the intergovernmental consensus development system, okay? And that, you put that in a second chamber, which is not the Senate, by the way. It doesn't have anything in common with the Senate. And you tell governments of the provinces to send their representative in this second chamber, and you give the chamber a number of powers, advisory and real, okay? So it is a house of the provinces in the sense that provincial governments are represented there. The Prime Minister himself can go when the matters are really important.
Is the opposition in the provinces represented too?
No, not necessarily, but there are all kinds of possibilities.
What you're telling me is...
but this is really grabbing problems and trying really to solve them instead of pussyfooting around.
In other words, putting the provinces with fair representation in Ottawa at the seat of federal power to which matters would have to be referred for final approval?
Yes,
in certain areas.
In certain areas.
Like in language.
No, but the point is that in this instance, Mr. Lougheed, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Davis, they have to go there and they have to explain why they don't agree with a conditional program of the central government.
Enough of this.
So it's real power.
Enough of this intellectual stuff. We've done our duty up to now.
Well, I was going to add, nevertheless, that there's a consensus that has built around there. Premier of BC has shown favor, Advisory Committee of the Ontario Council, the Canadian Bar, the West Canada Foundation. So this is the way constitutional ideas develop. A number of people, and by the way, our own task force has come out in favor of that House of the Provinces system too. So there's a consensus developing in Canada, and Ryan picked it up. And it's the first time, Jack, that a political group in Quebec has accepted the proposition that the strengthening of the institutions of the central government was of the essence. You remember, in the old style, it is give us power, we don't need you so much. Now, Ryan, for the first time, recognizes that the improvement in the central institution can be beneficial to Quebec too.
Very well taken. Is it not a pity, or rather, would you not admit, Monsieur Jean-Luc Pepin, political scientist to trade?
Yes.
Not a lawyer.
Oh, both.
Lawyer.
I apologize for that.
Will you admit to me,
when I was never
witness, is it not a fact witness that this election will not be resolved on any matter of grey matter, but only on a matter of grey faces?
Well, I resent that. I try my best, and you were very helpful this morning to show that ideas are important in the present election.
You're being a politician.
No.
Is it not a fact that with 20 Gallup poll points ahead of you at the moment, they'll drop to 10, by the way, that issues don't matter and it's only image?
Well, I hope not. I don't think so. I think that people, you and many people tend to classify these things. Image, style. You tend to classify that and forget that even for the person who thinks image is important, substance is also a consideration. In other words, image alone would not be sufficient. It's more subtle than that. I think you categorize these things too sharply.
Do I see any phones lit up? Put up the phones. for Jean-Luc Pepin. Now, please, thank you. Come on, waking up there. Come on, going to wake. Talking of issues, when I have local candidates here, I haven't done too much of it this time, but I'm doing some local constituencies. It's damn difficult to get them to talk about issues. I mean, money. We all talk about money. We all talk about the disastrous state in which you left our finances.
Well, you see, Jack, I presume the members here too, each one of us has a certain area in which he feels more comfortable. I feel comfortable in the constitutional process. You were kind enough to question me on that. I feel very comfortable in the industrial, in the trade process also. And on that subject, you know, I'd like to talk. If people...
Well, of course. Let me give you a question.
Yes.
Who came up with that crazy thing that Pierre said about doubling the rail line to the coast?
I wasn't there. I wasn't there.
That's your explanation?
No, I'm sorry. I
you
wasn't
mean
there.
It happened because you weren't there?
I didn't. No, thank you. I didn't know. I don't know what qualification he put in his sentence.
Well, you and I each know that the problem with grain distribution is in the facilities and what's on Vancouver waterfront and on the prairies. It's not a question of how many rail lines we have to the coast and rail cars.
I was responsible for the wheat board for a year and a half, and I think that, as usual, it's not one part in particular, it's the overall system. It's the smoothness of the operation of the overall system that is of the essence.
And the other fact is that, as sane people, non-political, if it could be for a moment, inflation in this country has not yet really begun.
Is that true?
When you compare it to...
In comparison, Argentina, 1,250% last year.
Compare it to the United Kingdom.
Yeah. May I say what is of the essence to me in terms of business and so on, of government? I've sat now in front of the distinguished members of the Clark government for 4 months, and I've looked at them. And Jack, what comes out of it is basically that they are ill at ease with government as such. They are ill at ease with government as such. They don't seem to like it. They don't seem to understand how it operates. They don't seem to realize that there's a pattern for decision-making process in government. Let me give you a few illustrations. A man that I like very much, Wilson, was made Minister of International Trade. I applauded the floor of the House of Commons that, and I said, why didn't the Liberal do that before? The reason is simply that international trade has become more and more politicized, and governments, countries need a front man, a political front man, to go and fight for the causes of your businessmen there. So I said we were going to have one, so I'm going to deplore that he's not in the House of Commons. He never left the House of Commons. October, November, December. I just indicate that as an illustration.
You mean instead of being out campaigning for his country, he was sitting and learning his job in the House of Commons?
He was learning a job, answering questions, and so on and so forth. Why? I think they're ill at ease with the very phenomenon of government. It's privatization. They want to give it to the provinces. They want to give it to the private sector. They're ill at ease with the phenomenon of government itself.
Do I detect a touch of long-time liberal arrogance in that? That only you people who had the reins of power for 11 years solid are capable of running a government?
I'm trying to illustrate things in other things than statistics. I'm trying to give you a feeling for it from the point of view of an opposition member of the House of Commons. Let me give you one other illustration. Joe Clark one day said that he was amazed at the number of businessmen who, appearing to contradict themselves, were requesting government support. Well, that is, in my view, a misunderstanding of the process itself. Businessmen can very well claim the full freedom of free enterprise, but at the same time look to their government as a defender, as an ally in a great number of cases. Again, I'm trying to make the case that they don't have a feeling for it, that they don't have a liking for it. And how can you do well something that you don't basically like?
Give me therefore your capsule opinion on a man who seems to have a feeling not only for the English language, but for, what's that word, pizzazz and command, Crosby. Now, there was a man whom you liked when you watched him on the other side of the house.
Well, I like it from the point of view of theatricals. He has a talent for acting like you, and possibly I in a limited way. But on Crosby, really, may I make a pitch?
Please.
Great style, indeed. The Conservatives, during their short tenure, have contributed to political science, as you know, greatly. There is first of all, there's the Joe Clark theory of promises. So when in doubt, promise. Now, I could develop that. I won't because we don't have the time. But this is really, Clark is a compulsive promise maker and promise breaker. It's a compulsive. It probably was born with it. Okay, first one. Then you have the second theory is the Crosby theory of the justification for the breaking of promises. Okay? He said it during the summer. If you were elected by reasons, for reasons that don't have anything to do with the promises that you've made, or if you can claim that, you are liberated from the promises that you've made. Now, this is a great contribution to political science, probably in addition to Machiavelli more than anything else, because you imagine what would happen.
I thought Machiavelli had come back and was running for the Liberals.
So it shows that it's not the privileged possession of any of the political parties in Canada. Okay, three. And this is interesting, I think. You've got Crosby too now. In the Clark theory of how to break and make promises, how to make and break them, there usually is a lapse of time between the making and the breaking, okay? He makes the promise because he likes to be loved, he likes to accommodate, he makes the promise, then he starts wiggling, he starts being uncertain, then a number of things hit him, the opposition, and then on a Friday afternoon or a Monday morning, he changes his mind. Now, this is compulsive. You know, all politicians break some of their promises, but not in that quantity. It's a quantitative approach. Let me finish with the Crosby thing. So Crosby has improved that process by making the promises in one document, namely the budget, and breaking them in the same document, namely the budget. That's really an acceleration on the process of making and breaking, the like of which, as Leaf would say, has not very often been seen. Let me give you the illustration of that. He says, and I've got the text here in case you doubt my word, he said that all the revenues coming from the energy tax, all the revenues on page 4 and 12, all the revenues coming from the energy tax, you know what that is? That's the 450, and so on, will be assigned to energy-oriented progress. Substantial quantities of the money coming from the excise tax, that's the 18%, will be assigned to energy-oriented project. Look, I figured it out. It's $17.3 billion. And then you start fishing around for what it would go to. And you've got this credit, which is worth $2.3 billion, so it's 17.3 minus 2.3. And then you look around for other possibilities. You search your mind. You say, what the hell could we do? Could we build a Bay of Fundy tidal project and so on? And you can hardly find the money. And it's said in the budget that much of that $17.3 billion goes to all other promises, namely, for example, the mortgage credit one. Now, the question is this. I want to prove that they are compulsive promise maker. He didn't have to make that promise. He didn't have to. He could very well have said, look, we need money for a great number of reasons. There they are. And one way of getting the money is to put 18 cents excise tax on the 7 cents that's presently there. You would have understood. I would have understood. Why do they have to take us into this gimmickry?
If you're correct, and they make and break in the same documents, and I don't doubt your word on it, you must admit that your people were still able to match them in a much greater piece of political hypocrisy and double talk. And what was that?
That's the anti-inflation board.
Wage and price controls,
yes.
And your anti-inflation board, of which you must have been, you know, as a party, you know, appallingly ashamed.
No, Mr. Trudeau has answered that question repeatedly, I don't know how many hundreds of times, I'm sure to you, by trying to demonstrate, I'm being very frank, that in between the time he made the promise and in between the time he created the board, circumstances of inflation at
With
change
a
in Canada.
longer time period between the make and the break. Webster, and your calls to Jean-Luc Pepin after the message. You certainly are a different kind of politician than those I normally interview on the West Coast, Jean-Luc Pepin.
I wonder if I should ask why.
Oh, it's a compliment.
Okay.
Compliment.
Stay.
A man of erudition, charm, and total liberal basic philosophy, of course. Been a liberal all your life.
Yes, yes. No, by process of elimination more than anything else.
I see.
Because political parties in Canada
You were
are
never a socialist.
border.
Oh, come off it.
Yeah, I'm not terribly interesting from that point of view because I think I was born in the center and I stayed more or less there.
Wealthy upbringing?
No, very poor. Not poor, but very ordinary. My father
Just
was a
wondered,
railway
never asked
man.
you. Your father was a railwayman.
Yeah. like-
Union official, no.
No.
Go ahead, please.
But he was fully syndicated.
Just one question for
Syndicalized,
Mr. Pepin is how can the Liberals say that they're a viable and party politically when, since they've been in power the last, well, let's say 11 years or 12 years, when I've been in the workforce, that slowly my working money through taxes is just, it's now started about a fourth of my tax money. Now it's close to a half of my money that I make and it goes for taxes.
Well, I believe that if the gentleman in question cared to look at the tax record of the Liberal, they have reduced them throughout this period in terms that if the Liberals had not put a restriction on taxation, indexation being the most important one, figures indicate that they would have had a surplus in 1979-80 of $6 billion. So, no, I think it is generally recognized. Everybody finds taxation rather annoying, but that the Liberals were not characterized by their tendency to increase taxation in the period that the gentleman
That's why
refers
we've
to.
got all these billions of deficits,
That's
of course.
that's it.
And at least Crosby was honest enough to tell us that in the next 4 years we'll have between 45 and 50% inflation.
Yes,
Wasn't he?
And increases in tax too for the gentleman who is phoning now.
I'm not going to ask Andy how they vote. I'm not doing any polls because I think these polls are unfair at this stage of the game. They're banned provincially, they're allowed federally, I think, but I don't think they're fair because I don't believe you're 20 points ahead in Ontario.
Well, the people have a way of answering polls when they want to. Most of the times the polls are right, but occasionally they are very wrong.
Well, you're
because
not
people,
too happy about the polls at the moment, are you?
Well, we are, of course, because they favor us. We hope to keep it that way, obviously.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, I'd like to ask you, you've had all the other political clowns on. Why haven't you had on the Rhinoceros Party up till now?
I don't. As a matter
not
of
a
fact, I'm
recognized
afraid
party.
the Rhinoceros Party is going to elect half a dozen members.
Where?
I also have another
Youngsters, cynical and apathetic about our system, may well vote for these people.
They're all in very, very small minorities.
No,
I know,
there's no danger.
I know they may be more visible than others because they shout
Why
louder,
should I put them on?
but-
Why should I make a bigger fool of the electoral system than the present formal parties can do?
Another
Well,
question.
that's a relative thing, Jack. You are one of the most responsible newspapermen I know. You know that the Canadian political system may not be perfect. You know all its warps and so on. But it's not bad by international standard,
No,
and
no.
people should realize that.
I agree.
That, people complain that they're going to vote in the winter. They should rejoice in the fact that they're going to vote at all. A lot of countries, 80% of the countries,
No,
don't vote even in the summer.
I don't think I'll put the Rhinoceros Party on. I don't think it's that funny a subject, I must confess. Would you like me to?
Well, I figure they deserve a fair shake. Everybody else seems to just be able to put down the other guy.
Look, I've got to put on I put on the Communists, the Marxist, Leninists, the Federal Social Credit, and the other parties, and I feel they're the... Carry on.
Will your party try to improve relations with about 40 Muslim Arab countries with whom Joe spoiled the relations because of his embassy move?
Okay, two good questions. First,
Well,
the boycott.
the second one is the easiest one for me, obviously. I still don't understand why Mr. Clark ever mentioned the transfer of our embassies from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I've got to go the crass explanation road that he wanted some of his members elected in the Toronto area, and that's why he did it. And only that, and he has been judged really by Canadians on this matter. I don't find anybody who sees a meaning to what has been done, even my Jewish friends. On the games, it's a more difficult question. Mr. Trudeau, my understanding is, has said that he would prefer to leave the game to the sport event it is and not to use them as an element of boycott. Well, that's, at least he's being consequential. That's what he did when some African countries decided to boycott our own games because of some difficulties they had with New Zealand, you remember. So Mr. Trudeau is at least consequential in that. On the subject of boycott generally, it's very, very difficult. Occasionally they may be justified and so on. But one thing is sure, is that unless the boycott is fairly widely agreed to by countries of the world, it has no practical effect. So the name of the game is really to sell the purpose of the boycott and not to go ourselves alone, half-cocked, in the...
And I'll bet that you were angered privately with Trudeau, even although you may never have said it, when he made that dreadful spectacle of the Taiwanese during the Olympic Games.
What did he do? I don't
remember. He wouldn't let the Taiwanese appear. They had the wrong flag at the head of their column, and they were forced out by the arbitrary action of the Canadian government under pressure from the Chinese Communist government.
No, but the point is made, is well made, is that these are complex situations, that there's not black and white, and that if you want to find political reasons for damaging the game, you'll find some. So if you accept one, if you accept two, then you're in the political game.
You take the Trudeau position, let's wait and see what happens.
Yeah, but
Webster
I emphasize the fact that action on a boycott, single file, is useless. You get damage more than you damage the other one.
Depends what the Americans do.
Yes.
Webster and Jean-Luc Pepin.
And others.
Go ahead, please, to Jean-Luc Pepin. Hello there.
The line is not too clear here, but can you hear me all right?
As a bell.
Good, thank you. Now, Mr. Pepin, if your words were money, we could retire the national debt. Now, what I want to put to you is the financial situation in Canada. I'm a concerned Canadian and a concerned union man. And as we know, we spoke about inflation and the thing's running away like crazy for a while, and it seems to stabilize a bit now, but inflation is caused by people purchasing things that they don't need and not caring how much they cost. That's the root cause of inflation. But this idea of double tracking the railway, this is Mr. Trudeau's latest statement, and it's a vote getting merry-go-round, because double tracking across Canada would be double crossing Canada in a financial way, because we couldn't afford it. And that was a very silly statement of his. And
okay, you've got that point. Do you think it was a silly statement of your Prime Minister?
Well, I don't know.
Your leader.
I don't know. The point, though, that the gentleman makes is that inflation is caused by people buying things that they don't need, is an elementary one in my way of thinking. Inflation is caused by so many things, and that's what people should begin to realize. It's caused by so many factors and consequently inflation cannot be cured by a single approach to something. Inflation can only be cured by a massive Russian-style, if you want it, approach to the problem of it from all angles. There's not a single solution, a panacea for inflation.
Well, you ran the anti-inflation board, you turned back a few things. Did we ever get the money that you ordered we were to get from various outfits in repayments and whatnot?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And you see, again, the gentleman reacts. I went to study federal institutions in Yugoslavia during the summer, a very interesting study. I was in Dubrovnik, and a chap comes to me. I thought he was going to punch me. And he said, you're Pepin, of course. I said, yeah. Chairman of the anti-inflation board? I said, yes. He says, I'm a school teacher in Toronto, and you, quote, us. And I said, well, that wasn't that bad, wasn't it? You negotiated for 30, you got 21, wasn't that bad? And by the way, I said, you seem to enjoy yourself here. He says, yes. And his wife came in at that point and he says, and by the way, we're going back to Canada and coming back to Greece later on. So these are excessive statements being made now. You know what inflation is. You go to Argentina, you go to Turkey, and you'll find out what inflation is. So inflation at 7, 8 is deplorable, not acceptable, but people should balance these things in comparative terms.
I get the feeling, Mr. Pepin, and I say this as a non-partisan political observer, that it really doesn't matter a damn who wins the election between the Liberals and the Conservatives, that the country's basic strength and energy can't be fouled up so badly that any of you can ruin us.
That's used to be said about France, and it probably is valid for
Is
Canada
there not
too.
some truth in that about Canada?
Nevertheless, Jack, this morning on two, because that's all the time we had, on constitutional matters, which are important, because after all, the country must be kept together. And I don't see the embarrassment or shame in people in this election talking about that and claiming that the Liberals have done more than anybody else. And on the subject of approach to business in particular, approach to industrial growth and whatnot, I think I've demonstrated to a certain extent that the Liberals were better equipped to do that without being arrogant about it.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Pepin, concerning the Olympic Games, politicians are using it for political points, brownie points in some instances. Now, I'm very concerned about the historical role of Canada in international affairs. They've always tried to play the role of mediating, keeping the lines of communications open. Pearson and the federal government was credited for the Suez Canal and even keeping the Commonwealth together. I'm wondering if Clark's following the hardline Carter's position will not hurt Canada in this role internationally, and what should be the real role of Canada with response to the whole Olympic Games in Russia?
Well, I believe that I've already stated my position on that. It's a very complex situation, and there are good arguments on one side and good on the other side, and that's why 50% of Canadians will be on one side and the other 50% on the other side, and consequently it shouldn't be a major issue in the present campaign. What I said, Jack, is that unless action is taken, and it should be taken in exceptional circumstances, and maybe Afghanistan is in exceptional circumstances, unless action is taken by a good number of countries, a reasonably good number of countries, it is of no effect at all, as damaging for the country that takes the action as for the countries that is the object of the action.
One more segment with Jean-Luc Pepin after the break. How long have you been in the House of Commons?
Well, I was there from 1963 to 1972. You remember I was defeated, re-elected, re-defeated, and so on in 72. And then it permitted me to do 2 or 3 interesting things, like Task Force on Unity and
etc. But the question I wanted...
I returned last May. Thank you.
I was merely testing your credentials.
Yeah.
What was it possible in the face of that crisis at the time of the budget defeat for Baker, the House leader for the Tories, merely to say, we're not going to have it today, and delay it?
Oh, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, if you look at the record, on the 6th of December, if my memory serves me well, he had said that the budget would be on the 11th, but the debate would start on the 14th. He had anticipated a cooling off period between the debate, the budget itself, and the debate on it. And at the last moment, they decided to have the budget speech on the evening and then start the debate on the budget the next day, which is one of the arguments that the Liberals use to indicate that it was, as I said it in Northern Ontario, it was suicide, not murder.
In other words, as well as this is an obsession to make promise, they have obsession to commit suicide.
Yeah, no, Clark's popularity, the government's popularity had gone down to 28, and presumably it was part of their arsenal of arguments to say the gentleman on the other side provoked an election in the winter and so on. They should be chastised, and we have a good budget that whips everybody.
Liberals wouldn't have chanced it. They'd have delayed it through to the end of March. Go ahead, please.
Well, we didn't have a leader at that
Go ahead.
particular moment.
You still don't have a leader.
Yeah, no, we have one.
You don't have a leader.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
we
be
have one.
serious.
Yes.
He was strong-armed back in there.
Well, no.
He might stay for
Trudeau,
5 minutes.
Trudeau would never be pushed by anybody, including you. So the decision was his. I think myself that one of the aspects that justified the decision was the thing we were talking about at the beginning, the possibility that he might conclude this constitutional revision process and go down in history as the guy who
But
put
he
it all
had
together.
quit. Let's face it.
Yes,
he had
did.
quit as
Yeah.
leader.
Yes, he did.
I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that he
No
had
doubt.
quit.
Yes, no doubt.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Ronnie?
I wonder if Mr. Pepin could explain whether or not the Liberals are really going to keep the price of oil down if they get into power. Isn't it true that to develop oil resources requires high technology, and in the future it will become increasingly expensive to develop depleting resources? And why are the Liberals pretending that this shouldn't be done?
Okay, oil policy, oil prices.
The previous argument we had on the budget, in where I think I demonstrated that a lot of the money coming out from the energy tax and the excise tax on gasoline went to something else, particularly the mortgage, in which we don't think we should go, is the explanation as to why, while recommending that while acknowledging that the price of oil will go up, it won't go up to the point where it would have gone up had the Conservatives remained in power. And quite substantially so, I would think.
Mind you, I'm quite impressed by Crosby's presentation to me of the fact that they've virtually got agreement with Alberta and the rest, and that there will be, while the provinces will get their share, there will be at some stage billions available for the high technology development, which will not necessarily go in straight profits to the oil companies. But surely you must accept, as this listener says, that it will be just as expensive and just as costly under whatever plan you have, and that you too will have to up the price of gas by 18 cents.
Possibly. I'm not 18 cents a gallon. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. The difference will be quite lower than that. The basic argument there is about international pricing. And Mr. Trudeau has said it quite clearly. Our price would be a made-in-Canada price. And the argument that he's used in the House of Commons, Mr. Trudeau I'm referring to, is one that people should be aware of. He asked the Minister of Energy, Mines and Resources, or the Prime Minister, I don't remember, if the price of oil internationally should go up from where it is now, up from 30, 40, 50, 60, 100, would that mean that the present government would up the Canadian price to reach that international price? And it's approved by the absurdity of the alternative. It doesn't make sense to do that, because that's a political price. It's not an economic price. Consequently, there's every legitimate reason to develop our own price. And this is what Mr. Trudeau did the other day. He said, in Canada, we have 4 prices. We've got the conventional oil price, we've got the new oil price, we've got the tar sand oil price, and we've got the import oil price. So he will make a sort of an average, presumably, of these 4 prices, and then will adjust what goes to each producer as per the situation of each one of them. So it's much more refined, much more sophisticated than the approach that the previous government
Are you the energy critic now for the Liberals?
No, Monsieur Lalonde is the energy critic.
What is your function in the shadow cabinet?
I'm industry, trade,
Industry,
mostly trade.
and commerce.
Yeah.
All I want from you now, Jean-Luc Pepin, is a simple, straightforward, blunt, private prediction between you and me and 150,000 people, specific number of seats in the House after the election.
Well, I would be out of my specialization by far if I told
Just
you
a
that.
private
you
guess.
know something, that a member must run in his riding, and the rest takes care of itself. In Ontario, where I am, in the Ottawa district, no doubt about it, the Liberals are going to be elected, and quite easily. I can predict that very, very easily also in this part of Ontario. But the rest,
in British Columbia,
my opinion will not be worth the amount of noise that I would create. So consequently, so that you will continue to judge me as a rational, as a wise politician, I will not make the prediction because I have no substance to base it on.
that's true, but at least you won't have Jack Horner sitting beside you in the cabinet. Must have a little shaft. Yeah. My thanks to Jean-Luc Pepin. Next, Brian Coxford's been out at Coquitlam City Hall to see what happened to those lots where the people were queued up all the time. After the break. Tonn, T-O-double-N.
Mayor of Coquitlam.
T-O-double-N.
Okay, what I got? What I got is basically a 126 voiceover, which you and I could kind of kibitz about.
I know, you do.
Who's this person?
I'll ask you, how much do you want to roll?
Yeah. How much do you want to get into it? How much of a time to get into it?
Oh, whatever.
15?
Sure.
20?
What are they going for, Brian?
You want to go for 20, Brian?
No, it's too long.
15?
I'll do it. I'll go for 20 and then you do the voiceover.
Okay, 20 seconds.
Brian had to get up early this morning to make his way out to Coquitlam Town Hall, City Hall, because of the fascinating stories over the weekend of the 12 lots, fancy lots being sold at fairly reasonable prices, and people sleeping inside City Hall. Never heard of such a thing in all my life. Looked like favoritism to me. Brian, it's your story. What happened this morning?
Well, Jack, the expected clog of people didn't materialize, and just the people that were there for the 4 days since Thursday night were the ones waiting for those lots when they were made available at 9 o'clock this morning. And these are the lots. They're up in the Dartmore Heights area at the end of Austin Road in Coquitlam.
All serviced, ready to go, black-topped.
Quarter-acre lots. And these are the winners of the first lot.
They've just been in.
Hans and Doreen Paz. And they were the ones that lined up on Thursday night, and they're going in to put their 10% down, which in this case was $4,200, and they'll pay the remaining in 30 days.
You've read the prospectus and fully understand it? Yeah, I'd like you to take a read through that, and then if you agree with it, if you would sign it there, please.
And David Davis bought 3 lots for his family. He was next in line, so that took care of 4 lots with just 2 people in to buy. And we're about 10 after 9 this morning in Coquitlam.
How many lots altogether?
12.
Price?
About $42,000.
How many people bought them?
This group bought 2 more lots, so there was half a dozen gone in the first 3. And then just after that, the remaining 2 parties lined up to get these lots, and first group took 1, and the very last group, the 5th in line, took a total of 5. So 5 people,
5 groups,
12
got
lots
the
down.
12 lots for a revenue of $500,000 for. And on the telephone, I do believe, is that you, Jim?
Yes, it is, Jack.
Jack Webster, let me speak to, I'm speaking to Jim Tonn, the mayor of Coquitlam. I don't suppose anybody's too upset, but why didn't you restrict it to 1 to a person and make 12 people come to buy 1 lot each?
Well, you know, we put on a sale of lots, Jack, about 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago, and did it on a maximum of 5, so that we could, a small builder could go in and buy at market value, and the municipality must sell at market value, which we have done. And when you reflect and try and learn from the process and try and be fair to people, we said, look, there's the market value of them. Rather than get involved, we carried those that 29-lot subdivision for about 3.5 years before the last lot went, which is the taxpayers' money front-ending those servicing costs.
Oh, in other words, the last 29 lots didn't go like gangbusters.
No, they didn't. Oh, no, there wasn't standing room only for those.
This time round, a price of $42,000 for a lot so well treed, and it's all fully serviced, isn't it?
Yes, they're fully served. They're beautiful lots, and that's fair market value for them.
Septic, sewers in and all.
Oh, yes.
Everything complete.
Wiring, curb gutters, street lights, sidewalks, the whole works.
How much is, much did you pick up for the municipality on the total sale of the 12 lots?
I don't know offhand.
12 fours are 48, $500,000.
Well, I mean, that's the total sale. Of course, there's servicing costs, et cetera, legal costs, prospectus costs, et cetera, that...
And they've got to pay cash, have they?
10% down, the balance within 30 days.
Okay, I thought Brian went out this morning because we thought we might have a whole flood of angry voters. We were wrong.
Well, we have to find a better system. It seems to me, and I've got some criticism over the weekend from some individuals who said, look, you shouldn't have let those people sit in the hallway. They should have sat outside where it was cold.
And make them suffer.
And make them suffer. And I couldn't do that on a compassionate basis.
The administration building has never had such good security as it had over this last weekend.
With these people sitting in it?
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much, Jim. Let me know when you get a new system, when you're going to sell new lots.
Thanks, Jack.
Much obliged. Bye. See, I thought, that was Jim Tonn, the mayor of Coquitlam. I thought there might be a bit of a barney out there this morning, but there wasn't.
No, I guess the word filtered out over the weekend. What's the point?
Yeah, people are civilized. Maybe there aren't that many people with $4,200 down to buy even a nice lot in Coquitlam.
They make them line up outside for concert tickets. You know, rock concerts and
rock concerts and any other kind of tickets, but you can line up inside for the sale a lot. How long have we got to go before we break? We'll break now. Oh, we've got to finish that BC Pen thing. We've got to tell people when it's going to be on.
Hopefully Wednesday, I think, isn't it?
Hopefully Wednesday. We don't know yet. Thank you, Brian Coxford, Jim Tonn, Jean-Luc Pepin, Uncle Tom Cobley, Linda, and everybody else. And I'll be back after the break. Brian was just reminding me that there were really good buys at the market price of $42,000, but there's no contractual stipulation you must build within a certain time. And of course, if they want to, they can turn around and sell them today at whatever profit they could get. Certainly a good buy at $42,000 in that particular part of Coquitlam with all those services and whatnot and whatnot and whatnot and whatnot and whatnot for tomorrow.
Tomorrow we have John Fryer, BCGU.
Tomorrow? I thought he was coming Wednesday.
No, tomorrow's
Sure.
Tuesday. He's coming tomorrow.
John Fryer, and maybe we'll do the pen tomorrow.
Right?
Hmm?
I think the Premier has something to say tomorrow first thing,
Bennett,
too.
tomorrow morning, not on the air, but he's
No.
got a big announcement tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock.
That's right.
And so we'll have to cover that right off the top and supply it to viewers as it happens, if I may steal a phrase from the corporation, to show you the way it is, if I may steal a phrase from CBS, and it will all be on Webster on prime time tomorrow morning, thanks to Linda and my dedicated and devoted hardworking staff at 9 a.m. precisely.